try to be a bit more specific, what are the typical blind spots you're seeing in investors trying to understand emerging markets? Because emerging markets always has a great story, right? Prosperity, growth, but it doesn't mean that you are able to capture the value necessarily, at least.
It's a really good question. And I think, the buzz around emerging markets have definitely kind of become a little subdued over the past years, just because you are seeing that emerging markets are, usually emerging markets have obtained high growth. If I were to paint it with a broad brush, emerging markets growth has come from exports, right? And so when you do see a deglobalization of the world economy, which we might be seeing, that kind of growth engine might not being as strong as it used to be. So you might have to find other ways to obtain high GDP growth. So the kind of, as exactly what you say, that the kind of main reasons for investing in emerging markets is that sort of narrative of you get higher economic growth. That means more jobs, that more people working. That means people getting a higher middle class, demanding more products, getting bank accounts, and then you can sort of follow that narrative up as far as you want. I would say that one of the blind spots that I've been I think one thing that's really interesting is that, as an investor, you want to beat the market, right? You want to obtain higher growth. And I think one thing that people tend to underestimate is the market now still is dominated by, Western, white males in their 50s that are based out of Western countries and who don't have exposure or knowledge to the kind of cultural nuances that are emerging markets. So I think one blind spot definitely is that people tend to exaggerate their reaction. So markets get very volatile. So if there's an election coming up in an emerging markets, they talk about, this is a far right candidate, this is a far left candidate. And then eventually what really happens in most cases is that the candidate is moderate, right? And I think people be like, oh my God, now they're going to get a socialist government. And so they kind of pull their money out fast. And it's sort of this, like, it's a lot of, I would say, dumb money in emerging markets. Another aspect that gets underestimated is that emerging market companies are used to being in an environment where they trust government or rule of law, or they're used to having the macro environment being very sort of insecure. So as a company, you have to be very nimble. So often you see examples of emerging market companies that are very good at sort of shifting business models or strategies really quickly, which is, in a technology age that we live in now, is very important. So, as an example, I think some of the best fintech companies in the world are in emerging markets. Payment services, the mobile payment services, that's based on a company that in Kenya. It's not from a Western country, it's M-Pesa, and it was Safaricom. And because, for example, because you have fintech companies in, say, Brazil or Russia, the banks that operate in these markets are very good in fintech, right? Better in fintech than, say, a European company or a US bank that has a lot of these heritage systems in place. And so it's really hard it's kind of a slow moving ship, right? It's really hard to sort of change the course of the ship. And I think the fact that because they are in these environments that are very sort of insecure, I think they are very well at adopting to technological changes, and they are best in class. And I think Western investors tend to be very arrogant when it comes to emerging market companies. And I think especially when it comes to environmental, social, and governance investing, right? ESG investing, which is sort of, the kind of topic du jour. I would say, you know, these are companies who are used to corruption. They're used to social inequity. They're used to climate change. Unfortunately, we see the impact of climate change in these countries faster than we're seeing in Europe, for example. And so it's more top of mind for a CEO in India than it is a top of mind for a CEO in Norway. It's sort of a, of course we're going to focus on these things, and of course we're going to fight corruption. You know, it's way more apparent in these markets. So I think that's also another place that's sort of a blind spot.